So let's look at Gupta architecture. The architecture during this time period can be divided into two different schools, right? Temple number 17. Sorry about that. Temple number 17 and Sachi would come under the first school. Now what is this thing happening? And then over here we'll have the Devgarh temple dedicated to Lord Vishnu, and the big temple at Bhitargaon, which is in UP. So, however, if at all, so these two are like the exemplary temples of the two schools of architecture, right? However, before we examine the various features of the two schools, it would be better if we look at the philosophical underpinnings and the social and political structure of this age that contributed to the architecture. So architecture of any period does not exist in isolation, right? It is these values and the social and political structures that actually go on and determine the architecture, and the architecture also in a way influences them. So let's see some of the facts and figures that would help us better understand the architecture. So looking at the religion first, we see that this was the time period when Hinduism was revived, right? How is that? Because earlier we had Buddhism and Jainism gaining popularity. Right, so it was in the Gupta period that Hinduism again came to the forefront. However, this is in no way to imply that Jainism and Buddhism, that during this age, one should not actually in any way understand that Buddhism and Jainism were relegated to the background, or there was some kind of a intolerant policy practiced by the society and the Gupta kings. This was one of the highly tolerant society, and the kingship during this time period, highly tolerant, and all the religions, they existed in union. I mean, there was there was no religious intolerance as such being practiced, like maybe in the period of Aurangzeb. However, again, we need to know that Hinduism was revived, and if at all we want to demarcate the period when Hinduism got prominence, and the period during which Buddhism and Jainism also got prominence, so we see that the initial period, we see that it was Hinduism, right? And then the later period we see that Buddhism and Jainism also come to the scene or the forefront. We see that all the religions existed or were thriving, right? So one of the examples, or one of the testimony to this statement would be the Ajanta temple and the paintings or the frescoes, right? This is the high mark of Buddhist paintings. It was mainly during this time period that the majority of the work was done, right, during the Gupta period. And also we see the Ellora temples. Although a major part of the Ellora temples was, it was done by Rashtrakuta dynasty, which is a later dynasty, I believe. However, over here there are 17 Hindu temples, 12 Jain temples, and 5 Buddhist temples. So all these evidences go on to show that highly tolerant, and probably we can also call it a secular state. Now, that being said, we need to know the reasons why Hinduism was revived. And now Hinduism revival. So there were two reasons, and there could be many more, but these are the following main reasons. See, it has been conjectured that the Gupta kings, they belong to Vaishya, Vaishya Varna, that is the traders, right? So, socially, this position of king was accorded to the Kshatriya Varna. So, there was some kind of instability, or say, this was a new system that was coming up. So, in order to legitimize their position or to get a social sanction, the Gupta kings gave huge funding to religious events and organizations, funding to religious events, ceremonies, etc., to get social sanction, right? So if religion sanctifies your position, then of course it is religion before society. Society is bound to accept it. So one of the reasons for this immense rise of Hinduism was the need to get social sanction by the political class or the ruling authority. From there we go on to see that so of course more funding would lead to better architecture or even revival of architecture. The second reason is that we need to look at the politico administrative arrangement of the Gupta kings. So over here we see that unlike the Mauryan Empire, which is highly centralized, we find that the Gupta kings or the Gupta kingdom was run in a decentralized mode. Just a second. Yeah. So the polity was decentralized, and we had many sub kings, or say viceroys. So this system over here, we won't have a very powerful king. It would actually inhibit a very powerful or a centralized position. Powerful king, because other sub-feudatory kings would check the position of this one single centralized king, right, who is all powerful. So again, in order to get religious sanction, that religious and as well as social sanction, these religious ceremonies and events and rituals were organized so that these kings come to accept his suzerainty, right? So that's about it, and this also throws a bit of light on the administrative arrangement during Gupta period. In fact, we can also see that the Gupta kings, probably Samudra Gupta called himself King of Kings, which means there were other kings beneath him who owed loyalty to him, right? So again, the political arrangement gave, in a way, it revived the architecture. Now those were the two reasons. The third feature of this period was that we saw a change from open air sacrificial altars to temple worship. So this is basically yajna being done, right? Which was a feature of Vedic age. So the transition from open sacrificial altar to being worshipped in a temple. Okay. So yajna is done, and now let's look at the schools of architecture. So the first school, which is the most basic school, had two distinct features. It had a chamber which would later go on and become the Sanctum Sanctorum or the Garbhagriha, Sanctum Sanctorum, and a pillared hall. So this is as basic as any temple can get, right? So say this is the chamber, and connected to the chamber is a pillared hall. Now chamber to house the deity. A chamber to house the deity. And a hall to shelter the worshipper. Right? Over here, we need to also acknowledge the fact that the deities had changed. The pantheology of Hindu religion that consisted of Vedic period gods such as Indra, Varun, Agni, and Aditi and Usha, although they were goddesses and not as popular, but they were also there. Now these gods came to be replaced by Vishnu and Shiva mainly. In the south, another god known as Shakti was also popular. So these were the new gods of the revived Hindu religion. So of course, when we say that a house to chamber the deity, we know that within the chamber it would mainly be Vishnu or Shiva enshrined, right? And then the third feature is a flat roof. I mean, the chamber had a flat roof. Later in the Nagara architecture, we'll see that the roof will have a shikhra. So that's it, the first school of architecture. Now, when I'm saying that we had two schools, it's not very distinct. It has not been categorized as such. In fact, the whole architecture of this period is been seen as a progression. So we can say it was, we had three phases. First phase, which is the phase I just described, and then we had a second phase, which was a intermediate phase, and then a third phase. So there is nothing, a watertight compartmentalization of the schools of architecture. Rather, it has been an organic progression. So, but in order to have a clear understanding, we are categorizing it into two schools. So now we look at the second school. However, I missed out the example for the first school, which I had earlier given when I said that the first school of architecture can be seen in temple number 17 at Sanchi. Okay. Now moving on to the second school of architecture, and this is where it gets more complicated as well as little interesting. So again, we had the two features, they were borrowed because I said it's a progression. So chamber and hall are still there. Chamber and hall still there. Now these two features, they were common, and also common between the first and the second school was the method in which the chamber and hall were placed, right? And the method was, we followed post and lintel style. In fact, I think I should have mentioned it over here as well. In the first school of architecture, it needs to be mentioned that we follow the post and lintel style. Post and lintel style, right? What is post and lintel style? It's very simple. Say suppose this is a slab of roof, or say ceiling or anything. Okay, so it needs to be supported by something to the ground, and these are columns supporting the roof, or say any slab that is being erected. Need not be a roof. Roof should have a wall or something. So I mean it's simply a slab of rock being supported by another slab of rock. So that's it. This is what post and lintel is. So both the schools of architecture follow this post and lintel style, right? So over here we have post and lintel style common with the first school, and then we also have chamber and a pillared hall in common with the first school, pillared hall. Now the main distinction between the two schools is that the chamber in this school of architecture had a pyramidal structure, pyramidal superstructure, pyramidal or say curvilinear structure atop it, okay, on top of the chamber. Chamber. So what we are saying basically, we are saying Nagara School of Architecture in its infancy. Infancy. This curvilinear superstructure would go on to become what? It will become the Shikhara. Shikhara, right? And this chamber would go on to become Garbhagriha or the Sanctum Sanctorum. So, anyways, so this is also a fact actually that Gupta period. Yeah, Gupta period, third phase, architecture was succeeded by Nagara School of Architecture, right? So in a way, third phase contributed a lot to the Nagara School of Architecture. So we just saw three features of this second school of architecture. Now let's look at other features. The fourth one is the entrance. The entrance of the temple was decorative and elaborate, right? So we had at both the sides, that is, both the sides, we had what? Figurines and worshippers sculpted along with river goddess. So we're seeing that these temples are getting a bit more elaborate, right? Then another distinct feature is the curvilinear superstructure that we're talking atop the chamber. It was placed in such a way that it had niche in which idols of gods and goddesses were kept. Gods and goddesses were kept. Right. Now, in some of the temples, we also see a raised platform. And at the same time, Panchayatna. I'll just clearly write that. Panchayatna. That's Y-A-T-N-A, right? And these two are prominently found in the Devgarh temple. So Devgarh temple is actually, if we have to point out at one temple which was, say, the most sophisticated or still bears the distinct features of the Gupta period architecture, it would be Devgarh temple, right? So let's look at what Panchayatna is. In fact, we can draw a diagram which can also be used in the paper. So suppose this is the temple parameters, and within the temple, say this is the Garbhagriha, right? Over here we have the main shrine, and over here we'll have subsidiary or say other incarnations of the god. So there's a subsidiary god, or so these four are say, or ancillary is a better word, ancillary gods, and this is the main or the supreme, or say the main shrine, main shrine. So this is Panchayatna, right? This is Panchayatna. Another distinct feature, which is the last one, is a covered ambulatory. And I'll show you what covered ambulatory is, and we can also practice this one, diagrammatic representation of Nagara School of Architecture. So this is the raised platform, and this is pillared, and from here we'll have So this is basically the covered ambulatory that I just drew this portion and mark it in a way. Now over here we can say this is the raised platform. This is the Garbhagriha. These are covered ambulatories. This is Shikara. And say this is pillared porch. So some of the features of Nagara style are being shown, and this was covered ambulatory, which is also a part of the second school of Gupta period architecture. So that's about it.